Hello, I'm Gary Lyon and welcome to Access All Areas. The second week of the finals didn't follow the script of the first weekend, as we had a whitewash in one semi and a scrappy match in the other. However, we had two very worthy winners progress through. Damien Barrett, welcome to you.
We did, Gaz. Thank you. And they were worthy winners, they were clear winners, and they both now head to Perth, don't they, with real chances to win through to the grand final.
No question about that. We'll get to those games a little later on. I thought North Melbourne were fantastic on Saturday night, particularly, and the Hawks did what I think most suspected they would. There was a big retirement, a couple of retirements. Rhys Shaw, of course, farewelled the footy world after the game against North Melbourne. The quieter retirement was Adam Goodes, who went without the carry-off, without the acknowledgement of the crowd, and did it quietly.
He did, and he made sure his best mate from a footy sense, Michael O'Loughlin, was part of that too, Gaz. And they were touching scenes, weren't they? We felt that this was the case. We'd felt for some time now that this was going to be his final season of footy, and when it came, it was emotional.
It was superstar. I mean, everyone, whatever's been said about Adam is from a playing point of view doesn't need to be backed over, but we will add to it. I mean, his reputation stands alone. 2 times a Brownlow medalist, so we congratulate him. And I love the way he did it.
Yep.
And the fanfare was going to come. I mean, we can say there was no fanfare in the way he walked off, and that's absolutely right. But the fanfare comes, and rightfully so, for a man of his standing in the game.
Do you think he did it that way for what's been happening to him?
No doubt. No question.
The booing of him was the reason he just walked off.
Well, I think there's no doubt in the world. And look, he's had so much scrutiny and so much public, been under so much public focus, and Rhys Shaw has his moment. And we will all eulogise and acknowledge what an unbelievable football Adam Goodes has been.
And at this stage too, he said no to the lap of honour at the grand final day. And I understand that, because crowds just can't be trusted to actually treat him with the respect he deserves.
I think he kicked the goal with his last kick in footy too, which was fitting. Lewis Jetta didn't kick a goal with his last kick in footy. He didn't, in fact, barely got a kick at all. He's massively disappointing, Lewis Jetta.
What happened to him? I mean,
I don't know whether the fact
since
that
he was linked to West Coast pretty officially, or semi-officially, around about round 10, 12, he hasn't fired a shot, Gaz.
No, I think it's been the disappointment of the final series. I mean, for a side, when you lose Parker and you lose Jack and these critical, important players, you need other blokes to stand up. You don't need them ball watching like he did here. And, you know, 45 goals, he was a leading goal kicker for the Sydney Swans in their premiership year, Lewis Jetta. The leading goal kicker. And he was irrelevant throughout the last probably 4 or 5 weeks.
His career track has probably gone down since that moment, hasn't it, really? I mean, he's okay at times in last year's campaign, even in an early final, but it really hasn't gone up the way we thought it was.
Grand final was a horror show, and he hasn't had any impact since. And I don't know whether that affects what the West Coast do, or whether they're just prepared to buy it and see what happens. But really disappointing from a Lewis Jetta point of view. On the other side of the coin, Damien, finally some acknowledgement coming for Cunnington and Ziebell.
Yeah, look, Cunnington has put together another great year, Gaz. Best and fairest winner last year. If Todd Goldstein hadn't have had the season he's put together, he'd be going back-to-back in a best and fairest, I would think. And stood up last week after the early stage of that Richmond final, and as did Ziebell as well. They were both supreme around the ball, weren't they?
That's the grunt work, Damo. This is what we're talking about. They mightn't do the flashy outside stuff where, you know, getting a contested ball in amongst 7 bodies doesn't make the highlight reel of the news or the footy shows or everything else. This stuff does. I mean, getting in tight, winning contested ball and then distributing, that's what they build their operation on from an inside point of view. And that's why I think a lot of people haven't acknowledged North Melbourne, because they don't have the Brownlow medal favourites apart from Goldie, but they've got the grunt workers.
Are they a chance against West Coast?
Well, they are a chance because of the Goldstein factor.
Yep. Because
Nat Newey's such a dominant presence. The one bloke in the competition that has got an ability to beat him, and did, mind you, when they won earlier in the year, was Todd Goldstein.
Gary, one way to get your heart rate up is to do some star do a lot of them. And Lockie Hansen, late in this game, would have thought he might have been tired enough chasing Kurt Tippett around, but put him off.
Whoever says you couldn't play AFL footy, you could do that. And I think, in fact, I think at the end of the day you would be an outstanding man on the marker, because I've seen you do star jumps, so very nice. Now, quick heads up that on Brownlow night next Monday we've got a live red carpet and Brownlow special, so join the boys from Pick a Winner as you see all the frocks, your favourite, and the glamour from the red carpet, plus a thorough preview of the Brownlow medal markets. That's from 6:30 Eastern, live right here on afl.com.au.
Hawthorn had a point to prove, didn't they, against Adelaide on Friday night, Gaz. And by way of comparison with what they did in the previous week's qualifying final against West Coast, these numbers of the Hawthorn players in terms of possessions in the first half It's just stark, isn't it, as to what happened the previous week?
Well, what do we always say about champion teams or champion players? It's okay to have a bad game because everyone does. No one goes through a career without having had an ordinary day. It's the way you bounce back and respond is what's critical. And right there, you get an idea of the response of a very proud football team. And it's led by a very proud football man in Luke Hodge, who ridiculously was pointed out during the week from articles that suggested that he's been sooking it up and was feeling sorry for himself. He'd had a bad game. He had a bad half, in fact. It wasn't a bad game.
Yep.
On the back of a highlighted incident from a drink driving point of view. I don't want to insert myself in the story. I saw Luke Hodge on the Sunday. He knew he'd had a bad game and he did what he's probably done throughout his career, and that is come back and make a statement and lead his side to victory. He's done it in premierships, Damo.
Oh, he's done it twice in terms of a Norm Smith medal in premiership, so it was no surprise to see him come back. They went with him for the ride, didn't they? They really did, including James Frawley, who had a shocker the week before. Played on Tex Walker and just fixed him up. And well done to him, because there was a lot of pressure around him going into this game.
Yeah, and rightfully so. Rightfully so, there was pressure on him. Al Clarkson and the match committee decided to play him forward against the West Coast Eagles. I thought Josh Kennedy was the obvious matchup for him, given his performance on him about 4 or 5 weeks earlier. Yep. He was back to his right position. I watched James really closely. We got Spud in the box next to us from a radio point of view, and he was on. I mean, he had a little bit of anger about him, and was just their energy was back. So he goes to Freo.
The question you posed 2 weeks ago, Gaz, and you put it out there, there will be some matchups for Hawthorn whereby you cannot take in both Lake and Frawley. Yeah. You said against Adelaide they'd need to. Yep. Do they need to take in both against Fremantle if it's only Pavlich up there?
I think it's a legitimate question because one goes to Pav. Either or, Lake or Frawley. Look, and then the next matchup, whether Taberner plays, or is there an obvious next matchup? And that's the question that Clarko and his group will wrestle with.
And is Lake the vulnerable one in that context now?
But I mean, Lake, by the way, Lake played a super game as well.
Yeah. The Crows in the end, Gaz, just probably just crumbled, didn't they? And this is what happened in the first half. We saw the Hawks numbers in the first half of their big guns. These figures are in stark contrast to what they did in week 1 in the finals too.
Cameron Walker Betts are all forward. They couldn't get the ball out of Hawthorn's forward line with the same sort of precision they did against the Western Bulldogs. There was no getting the ball over the back and running into space because they ran into a brick wall as Hawthorn's own. Van Berlo enormously disappointing. Smith was off and Henderson on the back of 29 possessions the week before. So they will need to address the way they play, because the way they played against the Bulldogs opened the game up for them, and it was great and it was exciting, it was wonderful to watch. But when they came up against the professionalism of Hawthorn or Freo or West Coast for that matter, I reckon they're going to have the same.
That gap's real, that margin?
I think the margin's real, So that needs some tweaking, and whoever's new coach will do that.
We looked at a person a moment ago, Gaz, Jeddah from the Swans, whose season had fallen away since the scrutiny around his future came into vogue. This man, though, could not be accused of the same thing. In fact, you could argue that he stepped up with the scrutiny around where he's going to be next year. Yeah,
so what you get here with Patrick Dangerfield, if he goes, and we suspect he is you get Chris Judd-like acknowledgement. Unbelievable service, did everything he could, value for money, dragged people through the turnstiles, and standards never lowered. So when you've got all that, as much as you hate seeing them go, you just say thanks for your contribution and we wish you well.
It'll be stage managed from here, won't it, with both clubs, Geelong and Adelaide, putting out statements, and the AFL saying something as well. I wouldn't be surprised, Gaz, if Adelaide matches the offer from Geelong. What that allows them to do then is to transact it by way of a trade, not just take compensation for him.
What about from a coaching point of view, the Adelaide Crows?
Look, John Worsfold still is and remains the key, Gaz, at both Essendon and Adelaide. I get the feeling he may not want to leap fully into the coaching role, but something like what he's doing currently at Adelaide is probably an option. Watch this space on Don Pyke, Gaz, particularly from an Adelaide perspective. Very well known to people there, very well respected to people there.
I think you're onto something there, Warrior. We will watch it with great interest. Now, the umpire's got a tough job, no doubt about it, particularly in finals, under pressure, but that's no excuse for this. I mean, the decision to pay that as a deliberate out of bounds is going to cost this man a grand final if, in fact, he was in the running. I'm sorry, I hate to do it. I know it's your area. You can go upstairs. I don't care.
This is just a wrong decision, isn't it?
Just a howler. I mean, everything there would say that it's not a deliberate. This one here, you can, argue all you want. We sort of know what he was trying to do, and if they want to be hard line, then I can accept that.
Yep.
But the other one's no good, so bad luck.
No, I agree with you. Score review too, we've talked about that a few times. I've been upstairs a few times about this. Bruce on the weekend, one of his 6 goals wasn't this one, Gaz. It was initially called such by the umpire, who Set it upstairs. You understand why, because you can see here on the replay it was very close. But when the goal umpire says, I'm setting this upstairs believing it's a goal, to me that's not conclusive proof enough to overrule it. And, OK, it's OK now when the scores are 50 points the difference, guys. What's going to happen if this is last quarter of a grand final and they overrule something like that?
Well, what it says, Damo, is that no system's ever going to be perfect. That is the bottom line. I'm much prefer to have the goal review in, but that doesn't guarantee you're going to get them all right.
No.
The fact that it was paid a goal, you're 100% right. And then when there was no clear indication either way, then it should have stayed a goal. Quick tips.
Freo against Hawthorn for me.
Yeah, I think Freo... You tipping Freo?
I am, yeah. It's not that surprising. They finished on top of the ladder and they've got a home prelim final. I think that's a reasonable
snappy
tip.
Tom, I'll go for Hawthorn and then West Coast v North.
West Coast for me on that one.
They're in the van, aren't they? So anyway, it'll be interesting and we look forward to it. Well done, Damo. That is it for another edition of Access All Areas. Don't forget to keep an eye out on the wash-ups with Damo and I. We'll take a close look at the semi-final losers, the Adelaide Crows and the Swans. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.